Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you, and today I am bringing you an interview with myself and Kragen Lum of the thrash metal band Heathen. Heathen, of course, is a band that came up in the Bay Area back in the 80s. They kind of didn't really get their start until the late 80s, and that's about when they had their first album come out, and then they lasted, of course, like most thrash metal bands did, through the early 90s before breaking up. Now, at the same time, the band did come back with a killer album called The Evolution of Chaos, which has since been remastered and, of course, repackaged. That was 2010. And then, of course, Empire of the Blind is the newest Heathen album, and that is a phenomenal record as well. And the band's been touring. You know, once everything opened back up after COVID, then the band started to tour. And for those of you that don't know much about Kragen Lum, Kragen actually, while Gary Holt was playing shows with Slayer, Kragen was playing shows with Exodus, basically filling in for Gary while he was playing in Slayer. So Kragen has a lot of experience with thrash metal. It's definitely something he does a great job at and excels at. And at the same time, he also works for a record label. He has managed bands for quite a while now, and he was also in two other bands, one called Prototype and the other one called Psychosis. Some really cool stuff there as well. So with that being said, if you do like what you see and hear on this show, definitely hit the subscribe button and like the video. And of course, I will break this interview. This interview is actually pretty long, but at the same time, I will break it up into clips for you, for those that don't have time to sit down and listen to the thing all the way through. But nevertheless, here you go. This is the interview with myself and Kragen Lum of the band Heathen. You know, it's been a long time, man. It's been a while since I've spoken to you, and I've always loved a lot of the stuff that you've done, from the Heathen stuff to Prototype to Psychosis. You know, then you did those really cool guitar books for Exodus, which is, of course, my favorite thrash band of all time, as I like to say. And so welcome to the show, and welcome to the show in its new format. And
yeah, thanks for having me on. It's cool to see you on the other line instead of just hear you.
Correct. Well, you've been doing some touring with Heathen, and we'll get into the album here in a minute, because I'm going to give you my opinion on how much I love it. Okay. But let's talk about touring. You've been touring a lot with various bands, going to Europe and everything, and talk about, I think you have an upcoming tour, right? I don't know if you
we have two.
Yeah. So you have two upcoming tours going on, and let's talk about that for a minute. Talk about what you have coming up and who you're playing with, and go from there.
Okay. Yeah. So, COVID totally screwed up our plans for Empire of the Blind. We had to wait essentially 2 years after the album's release before we could actually promote it. So last year, we did a real world tour. We did literally everywhere that we could, US, South America, Europe, a couple of times, Asia, Japan, Australia. So we covered a lot of ground. We didn't get to do the eastern half of the U.S., which we're doing in March, 1 month from today. And we'll be going out with Arrival of Autumn. They're label mates of ours. They're a younger band, and it should be pretty cool. We're going to do a couple of Canadian shows on this tour. And like I said, kind of just cover the eastern half of the country. And then after that, in April, we're going to be going to Europe. We'll be supporting Overkill. It's going to be Overkill.
Look at that.
Yeah. Exhorder and Heathen. And I think maybe another band. I'm not sure. But it should be a really cool tour package. We've toured with Overkill before when they did that. They used to call it Kill Fest. I don't know if they're calling it Kill Fest this time or not. But we did that probably 10 years ago, and it was great. And we got along really well, and it was a fun tour. So we're looking forward to it. We want to do as much promotion as we can. This band was inactive for far too long, and then of course when we were finally ready to hit the road and get everything rolling, COVID screwed everything up for us again. But we're looking forward to it. We're going to try and we're going to do that touring, maybe do a little bit more later in the year, and we're going to try and carve out some time in the summer to work on the next record.
Yeah, the after effects of COVID we're still feeling that right now with a lot of things. I just did an entire podcast about that, by the way. So I just actually put that up this morning. And, how have you guys coped with a lot of the difficulties? I mean, the difficulties of touring and putting these shows together, everything right now, everything's stacked against you. We listed off, I listed off a whole bunch of stuff, and we had this little kind of debate thing going on, and on the podcast I just did. And I'm curious, how have you guys dealt with that? Has it been easy? Getting merchandise has been difficult. The buses, vans, everything has gone up in price. And then, of course, you have the difficulty of every band, instead of like strategically placing, going out and playing shows, everybody just ran out the door.
Yeah.
And try to tour. So how have you dealt with a lot of that stuff?
It's been difficult. The 2 years of inactivity for the entire touring industry was difficult. I think that everywhere from the merch companies to the bus companies, that the crew that works for all the bands, I mean, everybody was kind of feeling it because they weren't able to go out and work.
Right.
And, I think a lot of things kind of had to be, I don't know how you explain it, but put aside. So, for example, bus maintenance. If your vehicles are sitting there for 2 years and not doing anything, they're not going to be maintained. So what ended up happening is everybody got out on the road after those 2 years, and buses were breaking down right and left. We had a bus breakdown on both of our European tours. Thankfully, the first one we were able to kind of recover and get another one. The second time, there were so many bands out that there wasn't another bus available for us, and we had to basically finish the tour in a Sprinter van, which sucked. Yeah. But I mean, I think what's happening now is, besides all the bands that are going out on tour, you have kind of like globally the economy in a crunch, and people don't have as much money to spend. So what we're seeing right now a lot is people aren't buying tickets in advance. They're waiting until the day of to buy the tickets. And so, of course, agents and promoters and everybody's panicking because they're like, well, we're not selling any tickets, and they're putting money out. So it's kind of a weird situation, maybe kind of unprecedented after COVID, see all this stuff kind of happening. I think the merchandise has kind of come around a little bit, but we're still seeing things like, I wanted to make, patches, for example. Oh, we can't get them for you until later, because they're coming from overseas and they're still having shipping issues, and getting t-shirts that are the right sizes. Stuff like that was a problem for a while. So it's been difficult, but we felt like we made a really good album, and we wanted to go out and promote it and get this band back to not just being active, but being held up in a higher regard. The Heathen is kind of never gotten the credit that it should have. And I say that not just as a member, but also as a fan from before I joined the band. So we really want to kind of get the band going. We've got another album that's basically written already, and then more material after that, and a bunch of other projects. So we want to keep being active and busy.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. Heathen falls under that category for me. I mean, obviously they were more of a latecomer when they had their debut album come out, but they fall into this category for me right now. I throw Exodus in there, Overkill, Death Angel, even the last Toxic album. I think that they fall into this category of these bands that were around in the 80s, and when they came back, in my opinion, I know a lot of people, I don't know why people try to roast me for this, but I think these bands, including yourselves, are putting out better stuff than they did, back in the 80s. So just the albums sound better, the songwriting's more refined. And well, I'm going to go into your album. You just talked about how you made a great album. I think that Empire of the Undead, I think this album really just, I'm sorry, Empire of the Blind. I don't know why I call that. I'm thinking of a Gamma Ray album.
I wasn't going to correct you, but
no, I was like thinking to myself, wait a minute. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute here. I'm thinking of a Gamma Ray album. Anyway,
okay.
But Empire of the Blind, and the reason I'm thinking of that, I was just listening to that album today. But Empire of the Blind is an album that I thought picked up where the other one left off, especially when you were on a very long hiatus. And I thought that you really, I thought the songwriting itself was a lot better this time around. It was a long wait, but nevertheless, it came out. And talk about that a little bit, because I think the band progressed, quite a bit. And Heathen is a band that hasn't had a lot of albums to where they've really been able to do that over a long period of time. And
yeah, it's kind of strange because there have been gaps in between the Heathen albums to the extent where it's almost like a reimagined band every time.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to Breaking the Silence and then you listen to Victims of Deception, they have the same players more or less and the same vocalist, but the music is different. It sounds different. It sounds like it's, it was almost like the first record was kind of like a speed metal album, like early speed metal kind of thing. And then Victims was like the band's And Justice for All. They went from A to D, kind of real fast. And then we had the huge gap, 18 years or whatever before the Evolution of Chaos. And I joined the band a couple years before that album came out and got to be a part of the songwriting process. But I didn't really have my footing yet, so to speak. I was the new guy. I was contributing. And I think the songs that I wrote for that album were more me trying to make Heathen music instead of just writing good songs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was trying to fit in, and what I should have done is not worry about that. Like, I think Controlled by Chaos, the song is great. The other two that are on there that I wrote, I probably would revise them if I had to do it over again.
Right.
But with Empire of the Blind, I actually started writing that album in 2012. We signed with Nuclear Blast, and I was ready to roll. And I had 6 songs already for the record in 2012. And then I waited, and then I demoed vocals for the songs in 2014. And then I just kept writing. I didn't, I was kind of waiting for not just a time where Lee and I and Dave could all get together and work on the stuff, but also I saw the band as their baby, and I didn't want to push too hard to do stuff. I was kind of waiting for them. And I realized that it wasn't going to happen if I didn't push. So with Empire, I actually took the songs that I originally wrote, and I went through and I revised them. I spent a lot of time during that 10-year period in between the albums working on my songwriting, analyzing other songwriters, whether it's in metal or not in metal, to see what it is that makes those songs great. I would listen to songs and try to figure out, why is this so good? What is it? And I would not, pick apart the arrangements and all kinds of different stuff. So I spent a long time working on the sort of the songwriting craft, so to speak. I know that sounds kind of, I don't know. It sounds kind of pompous, but I don't mean it like that. I just mean like just working on it because I wanted to write better songs. I wanted the songs to be great. So with Empire, that's what I really focus on. I was the only writer on that record, not by choice, but just because it was the way to get it done. The next record will have contributions from, several of the other guys. So it's it's along the same lines, but I think my whole idea with this band is to push the boundaries. If you look at thrash metal, the fans and all of the bands that play it put a set of rules around it. Like it's like a fence, and we're fenced in. They're like, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, but you can't do that, because then that's not cool for thrash. Well, I don't look at it that way. Thrash metal was always supposed to be about breaking the rules, not having a set of rules. So to me, the whole idea of, you must have, cheesy artwork, and you must have songs about pizza and whatever, like, to me, that's just junk. Like that's not what thrash metal's about. Thrash metal was about pushing the boundaries of everything.
Right.
So we don't care about that. We'll write a ballad. We'll write a really fast, aggressive song. We'll write a super heavy one. I don't care what tuning we're in. It doesn't matter. Whatever makes the song better and whatever works best for Dave's singing. And that's really ultimately all that we focus on. So if people don't want to end up calling us thrash or we don't fit in, like, I don't really care. We just want to make great music, and we want to play great music. And that was ultimately what all the bands that we grew up listening to have done with their whole careers, especially the big ones. I'm looking behind you with Iron Maiden and,
yeah.
And you look at their catalog, they don't care what people think. They make great songs. They make what they want, and that's what they do. And there aren't enough thrash bands that do that. I think a lot of even the bands from the original set of thrash bands, they're too caught up in pleasing their core audience. Testament, for example, one of their biggest hits was Return to Serenity. It's a ballad.
Yep.
Chuck sang. It sounds good. It's a melodic song. It sounds great. They had a whole separate audience of probably women that liked that song. They won't do a ballad now. And why? Is it because they're afraid that they'll piss off their core audience? Like, who cares? I mean, they've got 10 other albums that have all thrash on it. If you don't, it's like albums need diversity.
I agree.
The old albums that we listened to when we were younger, that we clung to, had diversity. That's why Metallica's so big. Was what they were always the leader, and the reason why is because they always pushed the boundaries. They were the first one of the bands to have a ballad. They had heavy. They tried all kinds of different experimental stuff, and some of it, like Saint Anger, was garbage. But they tried a lot of different things, and they went outside the box, and they got their audience, not just a core audience of thrash people, but a much wider audience. So anyway, for me, I just love great songs, and I don't really care so much about being pigeonholed into a genre. And I think ultimately that's what makes some albums great, and some albums just another set of 10 songs of the same thrash beat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about Testament, and all I can think about when you were talking about Return to Serenity, which is actually a pretty good song, I think of Practice What You Preach and having the ballad. If you remember that from back in the day.
I do. I mean, dude, I grew up in Los Angeles, and Testament would come down and play this place called the Country Club on every single tour, and I was at probably every single one of the shows. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about them back then was the singer could sing, and he could also sound, aggressive. They had a great lead guitar player. They wrote cool songs, and they had diversity. And, it's kind of sad to me that a lot of the bands have kind of gotten away from that, gotten away from what made them good. I think even Iron Maiden has gotten away from what made them good. No one needs a double album full of 10-minute songs. I'm sorry. I agree. The fat, make it one disc of all the best material, and trim out all the unnecessary stuff. Like that's what made the first 7 albums great. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and you're talking about the Heathen album, and you weren't trying to fit in. because I think on Empire of the Blind, you know, what's funny is I never really looked at the songwriting credits. A lot of times, I guess I don't do that as much. I mean, I do, but it's funny because it sounds like a Heathen record, even though I don't think you just went in, wrote what came to mind, and it still sounds like Heathen. So,
well, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
So there, that's one of the things I did when, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's one of the things I did when I was working on the songwriting stuff. I also analyzed what makes Heathen Heathen. What is it? Mm-hmm. If I broke it down into like a few core things that must be there, what are they? Dave's voice, that guitar tone, harmony guitars, and diversity, because they always had that. They had the ballad, you know. So ultimately, all of that stuff is present. And I think as long as we make good music and have the guitar tone and Dave's voice, I think it will sound like Heathen.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm a band, so I don't necessarily try to write like Heathen, you know, and I spent a lot of time playing with Exodus. So of course there's a little influence there, and like in the Blight, you know, I can't help it. I was there for almost a decade playing guitar for them. So, you know, but will the material on the next record be like Empire of the Blind? Some of it, but some of it will be totally different, and it's going to be like a surprise. You know, that's what I want. Every time somebody gets the new record, I want it to be like, what's it going to be like this time? That's what we always got when we, you know, got the records from our favorite bands. What this one was totally different from the last one. What's the next one going to be like?
Correct. Yes. Well, you know, it's interesting you brought up the fact that you were playing with Exodus, because, you know, I look back at stuff that you've done, and obviously you played, you know, playing live with Exodus when Gary was, you know, doing the stuff with Slayer, but you also, with Prototype, obviously that was a much different band. And did those experiences, like if you had to think about, you look back at that, did the experience of writing different music in Prototype, and then of course, you know, playing with Exodus, did that really, did that experience really help you in the songwriting for this band?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, I would say this, like the newer Exodus, especially just the last two albums, to me, there's too many riffs and not enough song for me personally. Mm-hmm. The older stuff, and even like Tempo of the Damned, I mean, if you look like if they wrote a whole album of Blacklist, it would be incredible. You should see how that song goes over at a big festival in Europe. Yeah. Why they don't have a whole bunch of songs like that, I don't know. But I did, of course, learn from it. I learned I learned a lot about what an audience at a festival likes versus what at a club. I know what the thrash elite crowd likes versus your average consumer that listens to music, you know, that still likes thrash, but just isn't like, you know, a thrash purist, for example. With Prototype, I mean, I learned a lot about that stuff. We were just writing whatever we wanted to. We did not care about what anybody thought. We just wrote what we wanted to. And we had weird influences of mixing thrash metal and Rush and proggy stuff that at the time didn't go with thrash. And I think if we had come out with that stuff maybe like 10 years ago instead of 20 years ago, it probably would have gone over a little better. Mm-hmm. Our biggest song for Prototype is the one that was in Guitar Hero 3, The Way It Ends.
I remember that. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
There, I mean, still like 10,000 streams a week of just the song. And, you know, is it our best song? I don't know. I like a lot of the stuff from Trinity, our first record. But we did love great songs, and we had a good variety of influences, and we also did have that diversity. We would do whatever we wanted to, whether it was soft stuff or heavy stuff or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff I've learned a lot from both of those experiences, and also playing in Heathen and recording with Lee. And, you know, I learn every time I work on a new project. And I'm always looking for ways to make things better. A lot of the stuff on the Empire of the Blind album has layers of guitars that you don't necessarily hear, but they make you feel something. And that's another thing that thrash metals has gotten away from, is doing, multi-track stuff with extra things that give the song something, And I love doing that stuff. My phone's blowing up.
Yeah, well, I totally get that, because I probably have received about 20 text messages in the short time we've really been talking on here. So it's interesting, because what's crazy is that I think of all of these bands. So it's funny you bring up Exodus. My son's 16, is I think his favorite album, I think it is Tempo of the Damned. I don't remember now. It usually changes, but the last one, I ended up buying him that box set for the last album, and he was pretty excited about it. I actually liked it. The thing is, a lot of these bands, and I see where you're getting at with the diversity, because I keep thinking back on Testament. I think back on Trail of Tears, that was on like the Low album, or some of these different types of songs that they were writing, like on Souls of Black and some of these other things. Some of these bands have sort of gotten away from a little bit of that, because the 100 Miles an Hour, granted, believe it or not, I like these albums a lot better, some of the newer stuff anyway. But, when I think back on listening to some of them back, when I first got into them, even Overkill, you listen to some of the stuff on Horoscope, for example, probably the most diverse record they've ever done. And, they have got, a lot of these bands have gotten a little bit away from that, and I get it, I understand why they're doing it, but part of me does wish, okay, I did like Solitude by Overkill on Horoscope, for example. So
I mean, it's like, I love AC/DC. You know what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I love Overkill. You know what you're getting. Motorhead. You know what you're getting. There's not going to be necessarily a lot of diversity there.
Right.
But if you look at some of the bands that did really well, the diversity helped them. The fact that Chuck Billy could sing made Testament more, open to other people liking the music other than just metalheads. You know what I mean? So, I mean, ultimately, we make music for ourselves. We first and foremost, and then for everybody else afterwards. So we hope everybody likes it. I didn't know what people would like Empire of the Blind or not, because it was more concise songwriting. We didn't have any epics on that. And frankly, in this day and age, I don't know if we need epics anymore. Everyone has such a short attention span. If they listen to the first 30 seconds of the song, they'll skip it. I mean, that's the generation, the younger generation that's listening to music.
Yeah.
So you got to really think about it, like the Iron Maiden, the new Iron Maiden record. Some of those songs, it's like, dude, like, get to the song already, or get to the end already, like
the 4 minute long intro.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm all for intros, but I learned that I think the intro, if we have an album intro, which we always do, that should be a separate track. If somebody wants to skip it and they don't like that, cool, skip it. Get right into the thrash, whatever makes you happy. I mean, ultimately, that's why it's there. It's for the people that want the album experience, and the people that got the album experience and put it on loop got an extra experience, because the outro loops back into the intro on Empire of the Blind. But
that is cool, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had the idea. There's a guitar layer in the Blight, and I used the more or less the same like musical idea motif, and I put it in the last song, The Gods Divide. And so I thought it might be kind of a cool thing to revise the intro, but it's actually in a different key.
Yeah.
And I like doing stuff like that. It's fun for me. It makes it interesting, and if anybody else gets it, cool, and if they don't, I like it.
Yeah, so I'm going to refer back to the podcast that just did. Part of the reason that I did it was because there is a large section of the fan base that doesn't realize how a lot of things work. They don't know how touring works or how some of these issues are affecting affecting bands, and how this affects record labels, and it's interesting. So, you work for a record label, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because a lot of people, we had a vinyl factory burn down. You had Taylor Swift ordering 1 million copies of her album, clogging up all the factories. All this crazy stuff has happened. And I think a lot of people are really unaware of how dire of a situation and how difficult it is. And, what are some of the struggles that record labels are going through right now? Maybe bring that to light, because I know some people, like, you order something and then it gets delayed 3 months. Well, it gets delayed because the factory that's producing it is backlogged, and they're like, well, it's another 3 months up, it's going to be another 6 months. And now you have labels taking pre-orders 9 months in advance. That's how bad it's gotten. And maybe talk about what are some of the difficulties and struggles record labels are starting to have, and difficulties maybe for people that don't know about this. You have a little bit of a different perspective, I think, and that would be interesting to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So, it's a couple of different things. There's two segments to it. So metal is one of the few music genres where physical, like, products like a CD or vinyl are still meaningful to the fans. Okay. If you look at like hip hop or whatever, they don't care about that stuff.
No,
they might want a vinyl record or whatever, but they don't care about a CD. They don't care about a cassette or any of that. But metal fans still want that stuff. So you're in this position now where these metal labels are having to, and have been for years, slowly migrating to digital. Okay? Because that's where most fans go now to listen to music. I buy CDs. I still buy them. I have a stupid amount of them in this room. But when I go to listen to stuff in my car, I listen to Spotify.
Yeah.
Because it's convenient. And I literally have everything that I want to listen to except Cyclone Temple's album that needs to be on there. I literally have everything that I want to listen to, with a few exceptions, right there on my phone.
Yeah.
And I can play it on my car. Or I can play it through a Bluetooth speaker while I'm making dinner, or whatever I want, So you've got this fan base that still wants physical products. The physical products are ultimately to keep the fans happy. They aren't necessarily where the music industry as a whole is going, if you know what I'm saying. So the industry's going, at some point, we will be only digital. When people don't care about vinyl records anymore, then we'll probably end up going digital. Vinyl records and CDs were up in sales over the years of COVID because people had to stay home.
Yeah.
And so people were, because they weren't able to go to concerts and spend their money on and T-shirts and stuff like that, they would actually buy more of the physical product.
Okay.
Vinyl records, though, most people that buy them never open them or never play them. It's a very strange phenomenon, but they're just a collectible ultimately. And we put a lot of time and energy into making these things. And, it's strange that people will buy those, but still listen to the album on digital. Anyway, so vinyl factories, you have to remember that after, I don't know what, maybe the late 80s, early 90s, when CDs came out, vinyl was extinct.
Yep.
Like no one cared. And so the number of vinyl factories got smaller and smaller and smaller. And when vinyl resurgence came out and people started being interested in it, there were a few factories and everyone wanting to make vinyl records. So what ended up happening is there's a queue, a line that you have to get in. You have to have your album masters and artwork and everything ready to go just to get a place in line. And then once you're in line, it might take you 6-7 months to actually manufacture it. And then depending on where the plant is, if it's in, let's say it's in Europe and you're a US record label, You've then got to wait to ship it from Europe and pay for it. All that vinyl's got to come over, and you can imagine that it isn't cheap, and it also takes a long time because they aren't gonna overnight it. You know what I'm saying?
Correct.
So you're ending up with this backlog of everybody wanting to release vinyl, and it's not just the new bands and the new albums. It's like, oh, we got to do a catalog reissue of this, and we got to do a catalog reissue of this, and somebody needs this on purple vinyl. We've got to do it. So you're ending up with all these manufacturing things going on, and the vinyl production is really what takes the album so long to come out now.
Yeah.
You know, you're essentially like you're 9 months away after you turn in your record from it actually coming out on vinyl. And it's because the labels are smart, and they want if you're going to put out a physical product, they want it out at the same time as the digital product, because ultimately what happens is people have a very short attention span now, and they're on to the next thing. So if you don't have your record out at the same time your digital comes out, and it comes out 3 months later, they're like, well, now there's something new. There's another band that just released their stuff, and it is out on time. So it's a constant battle for attention these days. There are more artists than ever. There are more labels than ever. Everybody can record at home. And the ease of recording and making something and putting a digital product out on any one of the digital, like CD Baby or TuneCore or any of the companies that release digital music, anybody can do it themselves. So there's this clustered marketplace. It's not like when we were kids, or when I was a kid, I should say anyway, because you're probably younger than me. But in the 80s, okay, and when I would be waiting for a record to come out by whatever band it was, and there were only a handful of bands signed to each one of these labels. At the time, it was, Roadrunner and Restless and Metal Blade and, what a Combat. And they each had like, maybe a roster of like, let's say 10 bands. That's not that many. So what you had to pick and choose from as a fan, I mean, fuck, if I saw any one of those labels, I'd probably buy it unheard. I would just see it. I would go, this looks cool, I'm going to get it. Nowadays, of course, you can do the same thing. It's just that looks interesting, I'm going to stream it, right? But the number of bands is way more, dude. I mean, the rosters for the labels are 10 times, easily 10 times what they were when we were younger. And it's because ultimately this is a business now of quantity over quality.
Yeah.
It's whoever has the most has the better chance of getting some kind of success.
Yeah.
And it's harder and harder for new bands to get attention. The labels are all waiting for the bands to get their Instagram presence or their, to put out an album and to have it sell well on its own. And the bands need help to make that happen. So it's kind of this catch-22 where it's like, new band. I work with a couple of different newer bands, and thankfully one of them is signed. The other one's still searching. But it's a totally different market out there. It's a totally different business. Well, the only thing that's the same is touring, and even that's changed.
I'll give you a little bit of a perspective from my end. So this is year number 25 of me doing this. Okay. And when I first started out, there was no social media.
Yep.
There was no downloading because you didn't have high-speed internet. To give you an idea, I downloaded Virgin Records in Europe because this band didn't have a record deal here in the US, because you actually had to have that. It was a Blind Guardian song for Nightfall Middle Earth. I'll never forget this. 45 minutes to download it. They wanted to send me a song. It was an MP3, right? So when I started doing this, what happened was, you had publicists, some of which are still around, even from back then
Sure.
I do work with. And what would happen is the labels would hire not just one of them, but hire two of them to work a record. And I probably each month, around 15 to maybe 20 albums a month. Okay. Well, every single day that I open up my email, I have 250 emails minimum from some publicist for some kind of band. Okay. And an electronic and like a million electronic press kits. And what happens is instead of having that 15 to 20 albums a month, right? I get like 15, 20 albums a week sent to me.
Right.
And not only that, but a lot of record labels, they'll send me stuff that isn't even metal. Okay. They don't even pay attention. They just randomly, it's like they're trying to make it stick. And now what happens is you have a lot of the record labels all used to have a publicist, plus they would hire an external person to help out if it was an album they really wanted to push. Now, most of the record labels, they do have publicists, but they aren't doing the same kind of job. Their job description is a little bit different. They have a publicist that works for the label typically, and then they outsource some of that to these other publicists who have this huge roster of bands where they can't even answer emails at a time. So let's say I'm a publicist from 20 years ago, and you would give me let's say I had a roster of 10 bands right now that I'm promoting.
Yeah.
Now, you email them, hey, let's set up a date to do an interview. Well, now these publicists will have rosters of 50, 60, 70, 80 bands. And a lot of times they just don't have the capacity and the time to push each one of them the way they did back in the day when they had fewer. So
that's right.
When I email somebody, a lot of times, now I've developed relationships with bands now where I don't necessarily have to go through some of those channels anymore, but
sure.
They get so overworked that they don't see your email. They might not get back to you for a month. They say, yeah, I'll get back to you. Then they never do. And it's like they've taken out all these bands and they don't have the time that they should take to promote them. And that's the big problem. Like, I'll give you an example. I'm not going to name the publicist, but I emailed them about a band. It was a younger band that I was really interested in. Yeah, I'll get back to you. Well, like a month went by. So me knowing somebody that knew somebody in that group, I got a hold of them that way, and I brought them on the show because that's just kind of what I do. And that is a big bottleneck for a lot of these groups, and I think that's what's changed on my end for a lot of this stuff. And, this is also part of the issue.
Yeah. It could say that about most of the jobs at the labels. Okay. Mm-hmm. So because their rosters are larger, each one of the people working at the label probably has more to do than they can really keep up with. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult, right? Yeah. So it's just a strange time for the music industry, because we're kind of in that middle ground where we're not physical and we're not digital. We're kind of hovering in between the two and trying to figure out what works. And of course, the labels would like everything to ultimately go digital at some point, because at that point, manufacturing goes away and like all the marketing money can be spent on digital advertising and not print. And, there's a lot of things that would be beneficial to the label to do that. But then there's the other side of it where you get pennies for a stream, you get a partial penny for a stream, I should say. It takes many streams to get a penny. So it's a weird time in the industry, and it's interesting to see how some of these bands are doing. I wish more bands were thinking about the future. And I don't mean the future like where everything goes digital or whatever. I mean the future like these bands are full of 50 and 60-year-old men. And how much longer are you going to play this kind of music? And when you're done, what are you going to do afterwards? Right. Like, you've been a touring musician for your entire life. What is your retirement plan? And so as a manager, that's the kind of thing I think about for the bands I work with, and try and help them figure out like well, how are we going to do this? How can we expand your audience in some way, shape, or form, or get you, residuals from placements in television or film or video games or whatever. I mean, we were fortunate to get Heathen in a video game for Saints Row 5, which
Right.
came out last August, and that was great. I don't know if we got any new fans from it, but that's the kind of thing that all bands should be trying to do.
Well,
something different.
There's the old saying, man, Father Time is undefeated, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, what I worry about is I sort of worry about the future of this genre in particular. And the reason I say that, and the reason I bring that up is, Iron Maiden, these guys, I mean, I believe Nico McBrain's 70 something, right?
Yeah.
These guys are getting up there. Ozzy just retired. Slayer retired, because of Tom Araya's neck being messed up from headbanging. You have these Metallica. I mean, they're not getting any younger. I mean, they're in their 60s. And then, the bands that came pretty much directly after them, like the second generation of just heavy metal bands, like, because the guys in Priest, I mean, they're in their 70s. So
yeah.
Then you have the generation after that, some of the guys that came a little bit after that. So, like Exodus was a little bit later, slightly late, even though Bound by Blood had been recorded for a while, they came a little later. Death Angel, I mean, they were a pretty young band. They came later. Halloween came later. All of these bands, that's the generation after that, who are like maybe 10 years younger than a lot of those bands. Now you look at it 10, 15 years from now, who are the bands that are going to be headlining Wacken? Who are the bands that are going to be headlining like all of these festivals and stuff? And so my thing is this: a lot of labels and just record industry people in general, it doesn't feel like they're not picking some of these bands and really backing them up. Back in the day, the major labels, as much as everybody hated them, it was like a machine, right? I mean, they could get large groups of people. And I'm quoting an interview from Blackie Lawless from Wasp that I did. I actually, from like 12 years ago, and he talked about this happening, because we were talking about, where are the new frontmen coming from, and there are none. And part of the reason is the record industry has always been late to adapt to a lot of things. They were late to adapt to the downloading thing, and they've always been late to adapt, because what happens is a lot of these people that are around now, they don't care as much about the future of the genre or the industry, et cetera. And you kind of leave it in shambles, because it kind of bottomed out for a little bit and it went back up. But now these legacy bands, and they're leaving, there's some talented bands that I have come through to me more so than I've had in a long time, and it's like, you need to get that promotion machine behind some of these groups to really elevate their audience, so you can continue on and you have those next generation of headliners for big festivals. And
when you have a roster of 10 bands, you can focus on them.
Absolutely.
When you have a roster of 100 bands, you can't. What will end up happening is one or two will rise to the top in terms of great streaming numbers or high sales or whatever. And the focus will be on those, because those are the money makers.
Yeah.
And that goes for the major labels these days too. The problem ultimately is that as the music industry entered the digital age, and part of this I would say is the CD, even though it doesn't sound digital. The labels made a huge mistake by not copy protecting CDs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They did it because they wanted to save a few pennies. There was one label that tried it. I think it was Sony. I could be wrong.
It was Sony.
And all you had to do was do a circle around the edge of the disc with a Sharpie, and you could play the CD. So, or rip it. I mean, so, the software industry did copy protect their stuff, and yes, things still got pirated, but it was much more difficult.
Yeah.
And once they did that and they shot themselves in the foot, I mean, I'm sorry, but Lars was right. As far as bands go,
yeah.
That ultimately, that moment ruined the opportunity for bands to really make a living playing music. unless they are ultra popular. Now, nobody has to worry about Metallica. They're fine.
Correct.
They will have plenty of money for the rest of their lives, and so will their children. But a lot of bands that have been around for the entire time, some of them did well. Some of them, I think, I admire the fact that they pushed through the difficult times and kept releasing music. Overkill, Testament, even Creator. You might not like all the Creator stuff that they put out, like Renewal and Endorama and some of the stuff where they experimented a little bit, but they kept going. And using Creator as an example, they adapted again. They hit, I don't know, it must have been almost a decade ago, they hit on something that resonated with people. And it was sort of this like crowd chanty, we're all strong, like kind of, I don't know, I call it the arch enemy thing. We will be together and we're all strong and all this stuff. And that's, if you listen to the recent Creator output, a lot of their materials like that. They also adapted to being more melodic. I love Betrayer and everything on Extreme Aggression, but what they do now is nothing like that. They do fast stuff, but there's always a chorus that's got a hook to it. And the reason why once they found that worked, they kept doing it, and they're bigger than all of the Bay Area bands. Yeah, I mean, they are maybe not here in the States, and maybe not from the U.S. perspective. But if you go over to Europe, they're way bigger. They're the headliner. So it's kind of interesting to see how some of these bands have gone one direction, and then others have gone the other direction of like, oh, we're going to write the most brutal, heavy thing ever, and it's like, well, just write a good song, man. Like, yeah. Well, once you've heard Cannibal Corpse, your thrash metal is not brutal or heavy. I'm sorry. It's heavy. Don't get me wrong, but it's not that, I mean, you can't ever be the most brutal or heavy when you've got death metal and grindcore and, come on.
Well, speaking of the choruses with the hooks, the last Creator album had a lot of that. And actually that was number 2 on my list for my top albums of the year list was the last Creator album. In fact, I'll be honest with you, I think it's my favorite album by them. And yeah, I mean, I grew up with it.
I personally don't care for that version of Creator, but I think I'm too attached to, Extreme Aggression and, sort of that era of when they were still on Noise Records. They had gotten better as a band, but they weren't popular. The songwriting, though, I can't disagree with you. It's great songwriting. And I think ultimately that's the reason why they're as big as they are. And I mean, a lot of the other bands have continued to churn along through the 90s and all the difficult times and made music. Testament experimented and did Demonic and The Gathering, and those bands, because they kept going and they were perseverant, they didn't split up at any point, and they're bigger because of that. That's one of the things that young bands have to realize. Like, if you want to make it in this music business, you have to be hardcore. I will not give up. That's one of my best and worst qualities, probably, is that I'm stubborn to a fault. I refuse I refuse to give up on trying to find a way to make a living doing this. And it doesn't have to be, quote, selling out. You just have to write good music and be consistent and put it out regularly and be active. And a lot of the things that, the consistency and being active that have hurt Heathen over the years. The band having those gaps in between albums wasn't a good thing. I wish that it didn't happen, but, all we can do is make it better from this point forward. So,
yeah, it's interesting because people don't realize in the 90s with a lot of those bands, they would release an album and then the record label would go out of business. I mean, how many stories did you hear about, Anthrax, for example? I mean, every record label, they'd release an album out. I remember one label, I think it was Volume 8. I did an interview with them. It came out. And then 2 months later, the label was out of business. It's like, really? and Halloween dealt with that. Because they didn't really have much of a U.S. fan base, especially in the '90s, but they would release an album and then the label's out of business. But a lot of those bands, Overkill was on CMC Records, they went out of business. So, even when Bruce was putting his solo albums out, from Iron Maiden, that same label went out of business, and that there was a lot of that difficulty going on. And and it's funny you mentioned the diversity with Testament. I was just thinking about this. I don't think with Dave Lombardo in the band, they're going to be making any ballads anytime soon. So just how
he's actually got more of a diverse lineup of music that he's released over his career probably than anybody. So who knows?
Oh, sure, sure. But I just remember The Gathering coming out and talking to Eric Peterson, and he's talking about how much Dave Lombardo changed the band, and they loved that crazy fast sound that he brought to them. And I almost feel like that's going to happen again, whenever they record an album. But I mean, I get it. I get it with the songwriting thing, but when you talk about the genre and you talk about the labels wanting to go digital, the thing with metal is a lot of the fans, even the younger fans, have that, what I call the comic book mentality, meaning that like in the comic book industry, they put like 7 variants out of something.
Yeah, they're collectors.
Right.
Yeah.
There was some guy, there's a friend of mine, there's a guy in Greece that I know that was contacting me to try to get me. There's 47 variants of the last Halloween album. Now, I think part of that is Atomic Fire Records, I believe, have their own like vinyl presses, so they can do all that stuff. But there was one he couldn't find, and he was actually trying to get it to ship it to me, so that way I could ship it to someone in Germany, and then they could ship it to Greece. And that's how fanatical. I mean, there's a lot of heavy metal fans are like that. So,
dude, there's a color variant of Empire of the Blind vinyl.
Yeah,
that we didn't get as a band. Like, we didn't get any copies of it. I had to buy it on eBay. And I just because, I'm a collector. I have been a collector.
Sure.
I have a stupid collection of thrash metal CDs. Yeah. Like the one Exodus CD that basically was only released as a promo and then cut out because the band didn't want it released. I have it. Like whatever it is, I have it. And it's because I have that mentality too. So I like that. I think that's cool. Cassettes are back in right now.
Yeah. What's up with that? That's the other thing.
Know. I don't know who's playing them. I don't know what. I don't even know who has a cassette player, but they're in for whatever reason. And so people are going to make them as a collector's item, if nothing else,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. The cassette thing, I mean, I love vinyl, to get me wrong. I actually play it. My son plays it. Actually, it's funny. My son would rather have the vinyl and then a digital download and doesn't really care for CDs, which is funny. And I think a lot of younger people are sort of like that. But what's funny is I love vinyl, but cassettes, man, they were like the lo-fi convenience factor. They really didn't sound great. You had
cassettes because you had a cassette player in your car or
correct.
Whatever. Yeah, totally. I mean, here's the thing that's interesting. Most people don't know this, but vinyl has a limited frequency range. Mm-hmm. It cannot produce the ultra highs and ultra lows that are on a CD. So when people say that vinyl sounds better, technically it doesn't sound better. It's just that they like the sound better. Mm-hmm. It's more of a mid-rangey sound, so people call it a warmer sound, and that's the reason it can't reproduce the really high and really low end that a CD can.
Right.
CD is the full spectrum. So if you ever want to listen to something as intended, the CD is really the format to listen to. Or I mean, digital. It's the same thing these days. You might get a little bit of degradation in streaming the song versus having it on a computer, but
right,
it's minimal.
Yeah, with vinyl, I actually have a setting in my shelf stereo up here that is specific to it with the equalizer and stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's good.
Only because you have to master it differently. You have to, and you also have to, you adjust the stereo. You have to adjust it to the sound of what a vinyl record actually is. And so I have two settings, the basic setting for playing a CD in the thing and the setting for vinyl when I do play it, so
Yeah.
that's pretty much how that's gone. So I'm interested, before we end off here, there's a couple more things I wanted to ask you. The next thing is with Heathen, you said you have an album written,
Yeah.
and it's, if you had to go and think about the music that you wrote for that, I mean, how would you, is it comparable to the last two records or is it different?
It's different. It's taking things a step further. I think with Empire of the Blind, I like I said before, I wanted to take all the elements that made Heathen, and I wanted to exploit them and make them more, right? So the songs are maybe a little more melodic, and there are some faster songs, and there are a couple heavier songs. Like all the things that the band does, I wanted to really go in that direction further. The ballad that's on Empire of the Blind is the most, it's kind of like the most ballady of the ballads that Heathen's done. Heathen's song has like a ballad section up to a point, and then it's a heavy song. I mean, that's, but this one was really a ballad the whole way through. I don't think we'll have a ballad on the next one. There isn't one. I didn't write one this time. There'll be some different stuff on it though, for sure. We have probably the band's fastest song. We have some super heavy songs that the band hasn't done before. There's, I hope people like double bass, because some of the stuff is going to be punishing, like in that way. Really just kind of pushing the boundaries of things. At the same time, the songs are all like really melodic. Like there's always a hook, and there's especially with the chorus, of any of the songs. If it doesn't make me go, yeah, then I'm like, it needs more work. But but by being a picky songwriter, we'll be able to get a lot of people interested in, the songs. If they're catchy enough, obviously people have to like what we do. Some people don't like melodic vocals. They only like screams. That's not us. So, but we'll continue to just do that. I actually have the next album written, and I have a title for it, but I won't share it yet. And I actually have songs written for the next album after that already. So, like I said, we've got a bunch of stuff planned. I hope that we can pull off the vision that I have for releasing albums and then releasing other stuff in between the albums, so that we don't have this sort of dead time that we had, like over the COVID thing really just kind of fucked us up. Yeah. I've had this plan for a while, but then we just got derailed by 2 years. And, but anyway, I mean, I think it'll be really cool. We'll see what people think of it. I always am curious to see what people will think of it. The songs that the band always thinks are like, yeah, that's going to be the hit, are not the ones people.
It's interesting, because there are bands that I've known for years, and what they'll do is, these people will send me stuff. They'll, what do you think of this? They'll just start bouncing stuff off of me, and I'll tell them I like this song. And they're like, really? And they're like not feeling all that strong about it. I'm like, dude, whatever you need to have more of this. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. And then, they don't expect that. And, now I'm thinking I made a mistake asking you this question, because now I'm jonesing for the next album. I'm thinking to myself, man, it's kind of coming up. I've always thought of songwriting, Kragen, as, whenever I've written did any kind of songwriting, I always think to myself, as a fan, would I listen to this? Right. Yeah. And then when you play it back, I always give myself like a day, and then I go to the next day, I'm fresh. I wake up, and if I don't like it and it doesn't move me like I thought it probably did when I was recording it, then obviously it needs work. That's how I've always looked at that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the beautiful things about working on Empire of the Blind for so long, having a fresh perspective of coming back to it after, not after working on it. And like the title track, Empire of the Blind, had a totally different name. It had a totally different set of lyrics. It had a totally different melody. It wasn't the same song. The riff, the core of the riff was the same, but I made a determination at some point to stray from traditional thrash chords. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I did that on Evolution because I felt like I had to, but I can make the songs more melodic by doing other things with chords.
Right.
It's stuff that we did in Prototype all the time to make the songs more interesting. And that kind of stuff is the stuff that can add to a song. There's a whole layer on Empire of the Blind, a second guitar part that's over the song, the entire song. And when I put that on there for the first time, I was like, oh my God, this changes the song completely.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like, it's got a vibe to it. It's not what it used to be. And actually Empire of the Blind is the most popular Heathen song. Like if you look on Spotify or whatever,
mm-hmm.
like by far. So I don't know if that kind of stuff resonated with people or they just liked the song. I mean, who fucking knows? We thought Sun in My Hand was going to be the hit. We were sure of it. I had a cover for the single. I was ready. And, you know, for whatever reason, that one just didn't click with people. So,
yeah, I'll be honest with you. The song that first really I thought was probably the best off that album was the title track. That was the one that really stood out to me, you know, at first. And, you know, it just, you know, it jumps out at me. You know, the thing is, when I review records and I go listen to them, you know, like I have promos for albums that are coming out like 2 months from now. It takes me a good 3 weeks to really be like, you know, how much do I really like this? You know, you got to get a perspective on it. But I think that was the song. Actually, believe it or not, you know, as you're talking about that, Empire of the Blind was the first song that jumped out at me. But Sun in My Hand is actually, believe it or not, was actually more of a grower for me. I you know, when I listened to the record, and I'd probably say it's one of my top 3 songs on the album now.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that song. We thought that was going to be the one. You know, we were all sure of it because we had all heard it, of course, many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little different for Heathen. But you know, we're going to continue to try different things. I think more bands should do that. And I'm not talking about like going weird. We're not going to do a techno part or something. Like we're not going outside of like metal and rock and stuff like that. But by adding just other elements into the music and trying to take the music to somewhere that it hasn't gone. Why would we want to repeat the past and write Goblin's Blade over and over again? I mean, it's a great song. Don't get me wrong. I love playing it live, but I don't want to make a record of 10 songs of that. I want to do something the band hasn't done already. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, and then the album after that, you know, I've got stuff for that one already too. So I turned my lyric sheets around though, so you can't see.
Well, the light's reflecting them, so I wouldn't be able to see them anyway from here.
I know. I had them the other way because it had lyrics for not the next album, but the one after that.
So, well, that's cool, man. Well, hey, you know, I really appreciate you coming on. I think that, one last thing I forgot to bring up before we end this. You did a reissue with Psychosis. I know I didn't bring them up here, but you had like this reissue or something you put out.
Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit before we end off here.
Yeah, sure. Actually, so for the people that don't know, I have my own record label. It's called Sublevel Records. It's the way that I release all my guitar books and any CDs and other music projects that I work on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that Psychosis reissue we had a CD in 1992 called Life Force, and it was our first release. We were one of the first bands on the LA scene to like make a CD, you know, of our own. It was that kind of thing. And we printed, I think, about 1,500 copies of it. And it's been sold out for like, you know, or out of print, I should say, for years. So I had this idea of reissuing it and reimagining the artwork. NASA recently made all of the Hubble telescope images like free. for use. And we have found this awesome picture of what the original was, which was a sun with a solar flare. And so we took that, and we took the music, and we had it remastered, and we took the original demo with me singing from a couple years before that, and put it on there as bonus tracks, and put together a really cool package with the lyrics that weren't in the original CD release and some photos. And it's just a really cool package. We called it the 30th anniversary edition. And we're going to probably keep doing stuff like that. We just recently got the rights to the prototype albums back. And they quietly went up under the Sub-Level Records digitally, but we're going to do a reissue. We'll probably start with Continuum, because that's been out of print now, and because The Way It Ends was so popular, we'll probably reissue that on CD first. Mm-hmm. We're in the middle of remixing Trinity from the original recording. So it'll be a completely new mix, more like we intended, so you can actually hear everything. Mm-hmm. So, prototype reissues and stuff like that. There's a great band called Invicta from Canada. Their guitar player, singer Kyle, plays guitar for Heathen, filling in for Lee, live. Pretty much he did all the touring with us for Empire of the Blind.
Right.
And I'm going to be putting their album out. It's really great. They have a new video for their song Sinister Obsession. It's on my YouTube channel. Well, not my YouTube channel, the label YouTube channel. I basically I like helping bands that can't get where they need to go, and at least help them have a CD release that they're proud of. Frankly, a lot of the do-it-yourself CDs that I get from people, they look terrible. The layout's not appealing. It doesn't look like a pro release, and I want to help bands get stuff like that going.
Sure.
There's another band called Vicious Circle that is from the Pennsylvania area, and they put out a killer album called Cryptic Void back in the 90s, and it had, the artwork wasn't very good, and it just didn't get what it deserved, because it was also the 90s.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do a reissue of that with all new artwork, and it's going to be remastered, and really, really trying to do some cool stuff. I just do this stuff for fun. There's not really any money in releasing a CD or whatever. It's more about making something and being creative and doing some cool stuff. And I like doing those projects. I like doing that. I like doing the music books, the guitar books. I haven't had much time because we've been on the road, and I have a job now, so it's a little more difficult. Sure. One thing that all fans should remember when they're always like, well, why can't you do this? And why can't you do this? There's literally not enough time in the day for me to do everything that I want to do.
Right.
It's we just get done as much as we can get done every day.
Yeah. I remember one time I asked Bruce Dickinson in an interview, I said, hey, why are you involved in so much stuff? You're flying planes, you're fencing, doing all this stuff. And he says he hates to waste time.
It is, you know what? It's one of my pet peeves. If I have to sit in traffic, I get infuriated. Yeah. And it's not really the traffic. It's just that my time is wasted. What could I be doing with that time?
Yeah.
I like to be busy, but not just that. I like to be productive.
Yeah.
I've got a notepad next to me of stuff that I've actually already got almost all the guitar tracks for the next Heathen record done also. But I have stuff that I have to finish. I'm working on a live EP for Heathen. There's a lot of projects that we're kind of working towards right now, and it's like a jug every day.
Yeah.
But I have family, and the dog, and there's something going on away time. So when people will ask all the time, well, how come Lee can't go from this Exodus tour to the Heathen tour and then back to the Exodus tour? And it's like, dude, come on, man. Like, he's a human, he's got 2 kids and a wife, and he wants to be home. Like, he can't do everything, and he's got to choose to do what pays best, and Exodus pays more. So,
Sure.
like, it's reality. It's like any job for anyone, I mean, it's not any job. It's an awesome job to go play music. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, like, you have to fend for your family and for yourself, and do what you have to do. So it's a struggle to try and make it a living being a musician. So wherever you can find a way to do it, it's, if ultimately you just want to get enjoyment out of it. That's the most important. If you're going to struggle, it might as well be worth it.
Absolutely, man. Well, hey, I got to tell you, before I hit the end of the recording here, I do appreciate you coming on, taking the time out. I know you're a pretty busy guy, and it's always nice to catch up with you. And we talk about Prototype, the Continuing album. That was actually the first time you ever came on my show. That was a long time ago.
I know. Yeah. I remember that. That was 2006.
You and Vince came on.
That's right. Yep.
I remember that. I remember that distinctly. So we had that. In fact, if I remember correctly, you guys came, it was a live interview, because I actually piped both of you in, never spoke to you guys before. And then, then the next album after that you came on, but I remember the first interview, and actually, believe it or not, I save all that stuff. I actually still have that somewhere.
That's killer, dude.
It's on a mini disc somewhere, but I do have it. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
I've archived every interview from 1998 until now. I think there's only 2 that I don't have anymore. And most, like, the early stuff's hard because it's on DAT tape. So I have to I have a DAT player. I have to go and convert it. That was the norm for me until I started using mini discs, which I still have a program that'll rip it off the disc and put it out for me. But then, then I started using my studio that I have, and I think it was 2008 is when I started doing that, going that route. But it's definitely, that was the first time. So that would have been 17 years ago, which makes me feel a little bit old, because doing this a long time.
Been doing this a long time.
Well, hey, I got to tell you something. I appreciate it, though. It was cool to talk to you. It's always nice to pick your brain about things. And, it's always been a blast to be able to talk to you and keep us updated. I'm really looking forward to what Heathen has going on, because if there's one thing that people know about me, even though I'm friends with a lot of guys in power metal bands, I can never get enough thrash metal. That's just how it is.
There you go.
That's how it always been for me.
We'll give you another slap as soon as we can.
Awesome, man.